Started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Intelligent Records Management. We appreciate you all being here, and the first thing I would like to do on the next slide is take a second and introduce our speakers today. My name is Matthew Deeden, and I am the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Gimmal, and I am joined by our key speaker today, the Director of Sales Engineering, Dean Meisenheimer. So before we get started on the next slide, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. We will be having a live Q&A after today's session, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar, and then at the end, we will answer as many questions as we can get to. And if you have any technical difficulties, please send us a message and let us know so we can help you solve any issues that you might be having. So with that, let's begin. First, I have a few slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal. Gimmal is a records management software company that was founded in 2002. We have a service team and global network of partners that have been delivering solutions together for our clients for more than 17 years. Our primary technology partners are Microsoft and SAP. Our implementation partners include small specialty SIs with very specific areas of expertise, as well as large global SIs and consultants like PwC and Lockheed Martin. And with over 500,000 licensed end users and growing, we really do have a strong community of some of the best clients in the world. Now on the next slide, I'm going to go into detail about a little bit about the problems that Gimmal software solves. The reason Gimmal exists is because so many enterprises struggle to manage the sheer volume of information and systems they have. So for years, they have been adding business applications and information, but they haven't been able to create a consistent way to manage the life cycle of their information across these systems or dispose of unneeded or outdated information. Now, this makes doing business more difficult, less secure, and definitely less compliant. So Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workspace, and our comprehensive software products include records management, content governance for Sharepoint, you see there in the middle, and then document management for SAP there on the right. Now, what we're going to talk about specifically today is the records management component on the left, and then the content governance for Sharepoint product in the middle. These products exist because organizations have been putting the burden of records management and content governance on their users, asking them to do things like tag, classify, file, and manage information, whether it is electronic or physical. And many of those employees don't know the correct classification for documents or what the proper life cycle is. So the records management process itself becomes too cumbersome and time consuming. So it is generally pushed aside or just done inaccurately. Now, the first product I want to talk to you about specifically today is Gimmal's content governance for Sharepoint. Now, it solves the first hurdle in the records management process by classifying newly uploaded content correctly and then storing that content in its proper location. Now, this classification tool is specific for content that is being uploaded to Sharepoint and Office 365, and it ensures that all information in those platforms are accounted for and organized properly. Now, the content governance for Sharepoint product also has features like enhanced search to maximize information findability across sites and document templates for enforcing brand standards. Now, the second product we're going to talk about today is the Gimmal Records Management product, which is an enterprise-wide records management software that offers seamless integration to manage all of your information within all of your repositories, not just Sharepoint and Office 365. But things like file shares, Box, FileNet, Documentum, etc. It manages all of those content sources consistently from a single dashboard. And with a centralized file plan builder that ensures all of your organization's most valuable information is managed properly with the correct retention schedule. So it can also manage physical records, both on-site and off-site. So by combining physical information with digital records, Gimmal Records Management really will give your organization a unified view and access point of your entire information inventory. Now, this solution can be deployed on-premise in the cloud, and we also provide it as a web-based SaaS offering. But without further ado and death by PowerPoint, I'm going to hand it over to Dean so he can begin his in-depth demonstration and show you how those two products work together to simplify and automate the information management process.
Thanks, Matt. So let me get out of the slides here. We'll hide those away for the moment. All right. So everyone should see three nice blue pie charts across the front of the screen. This is the primary interface for Gimmal Records Management. So we're going to spend some time here, and then we'll touch a little bit on the governance tools for SharePoint. But as Matt mentioned, Gimbal Records Management is designed to allow you to manage records across multiple content sources and be able to manage those records in place. Unlike a centralized approach where all of your records need to be picked up and moved into a central repository, Gimbal can reach into your various content sources. So in this example, through our series of connectors, I'm reaching into SharePoint Online. I'm reaching into SharePoint On-Premise. In my example, it happens to be SharePoint 2016. I've got a Documentum repository that I'm managing records in. I'm managing records on the file share. And we're even able to create and manage physical records in Gimbal Records Management. So from a single interface, as a records manager, I can see and manage records across multiple content sources, right? I don't have to pick all that content up and try and migrate it into a central repository. The way we do this, the connectors reach out from the central Gimbal Records Management web application, and they will identify content in these various content sources, and they will then crawl the content and extract properties off that content. Then we run through a classification process where, as Matt talked about, we will try and automatically classify your records against your corporate file plan. The whole goal, and really one of the reasons a lot of records management projects in the past have failed, is they put an expectation on the end user to do record classification or to add metadata about what, how to classify the record, and that's not their role. Our idea is to identify the records that are out there, run through an automated classification process based on rules set up by your records team, and then automatically assign the records to the respective record class. So the center pie chart here shows me, here are the most commonly used record classes out of my file plan. HUM07, my personnel files. ADM05, my project management. LEG01, my contracts. HUM01, my benefits enrollment. And then other shows me how many other records there are scattered across my other various record classes. So the idea is your end users can focus on doing their job, uploading content, putting it in the right place, doing their day-to-day business. You as a records manager can set the policies up in the background, can organize your file plan, and the records classification will happen based on those policies that you put in place. In the center of the screen, I can quickly see the most recent records that have been brought into the system. So here, from a single glance, you can see that I've got physical record that was added to the system. I've got a SharePoint on-premise record that was added to the system. I've got some file share records. I've got SharePoint Online records. I've had records coming in from all of these different locations into Gimbal Records Management. If I want to see the details on one of these records, I can, just by coming over here and first of all looking, it tells me, hey, it came from SharePoint, here's the date and the time, here's how that record was classified, and here is actually a link to the URI of that record, where it's actually located at. So if I click it, assuming I have permissions in the SharePoint repository, I could view the record. If I want to see more information, I can come in here and click the ellipsis. When I click the ellipsis, it now brings up a record details screen that shows me information like the title of the record class that it's been assigned to, a unique identifier that every record will be assigned. It tells me if the record is electronic or if the record is physical, shows me that URI again, and then visually shows me the life cycle that the record inherited based on its record classification. So I can see my policies inherit a life cycle called superseded plus 2 years. So once this policy is superseded, retention will begin. We will automatically do what we call declare a record, meaning we'll lock it down, make it immutable, and then we'll keep it for 2 years and ultimately do a dispose and delete. And I can see this kind of information for any record, whether it's a file share record sitting out on my network file share somewhere, or if it's a physical record, right? Sitting, sitting on a box sitting on a shelf somewhere, but represented in the system. And if it is a physical record, guess what? It quickly tells me that, hey, this is a physical record, not an electronic record. But how it's classified, how life cycles are applied, how it's managed is no different within my electronic records. So from a single screen here, I can have a view of everything that's being managed by Gimmal Records Management across different content sources. If I want to see more information, I can scroll down to the bottom, and there's a horizontal bar chart here that actually shows me every single record class that has one or more records associated to it. And by hovering over the bar, I can quickly see how many records there are in that record class. Now, again, if I want to see even more information about my records, I can come in here and click on the pull down. And now I could say, well, as a records manager, maybe I want to override the record classification. I don't like how it was automatically classified. I can come in here as a records manager, choose from any of my available record classes, and reclassify the record simply by saying save. When I do that, the record would be reclassified. The new life cycle would automatically be inherited based on that classification. And then in the background, a timer job would now recalculate the expiration date on this record based on the new life cycle. If I want to take other actions, I can do things like declare a record. That's where we lock a record down and make it immutable in the repository where it's at rest, whether that's SharePoint, Documentum, or another location. I could mark a record as obsolete or superseded. I could add a record to a legal hold. So if I wanted to come in here and add this record to a hold, I could simply click legal hold, come in here, choose from my available legal cases that have been created, and now confirm that, right? And the record would be added to a hold. I would visually see that in the record details, and if the record reached its expiration date, disposition would be suspended because it's on hold. And then I can also see information like the audit trail about the record. So if I wanted to see all of the information about what has happened to this record since it was first captured into the system, I can go back to the very beginning, see when the record was captured, see that it's been updated, gone through a few different screens of information, see the record expiration date has been calculated based on it reaching a certain phase of its life cycle. And I could print this audit trail out as a report if I needed to keep that for various reasons. And then lastly, I mentioned that we reach out and we crawl the repositories and crawl the records to discover them and do the classification. And all of the record properties that we capture are stored in the records database. So now I can come in here and do things like see, hey, what are all the properties that were captured for this record? I know the created date, I know the file name of the record, I know the size, I know the folder it's sitting in and when it was last modified, and now I know which of our connectors discovered that record. This one happens to have come from SharePoint Online. I can see the content type in SharePoint that the record is. I can see the URL to the folder where it's located, the name of the library in SharePoint, the title, the name of the website, the SharePoint site collection, the URL to that site collection, the full path to the record, as well as that path broken down into the different levels. And then I can start to see all of the specific information about the record, right? All of the different metadata columns that were captured off of that record. All of that information can be used to drive the automated classification process in the background. And I'll show you how that's set up here in a few minutes. Right? So as we crawl and capture information about your records through these various repositories, we're storing and managing a lot of information about the records that can be used for classification, to drive retention, to do reporting, and a lot of other information. If I go to the Manage screen, this is where I can have another view now of everything that's being managed. Here I've got a big long list of records. You can see SharePoint records, file share records, physical records. Now I can start to see additional information visually, right? The UI of Gimmal Records Management is designed for a records manager, designed to be very visual in nature. So I quickly see there's a little gavel here that tells me that this record happens to be on legal hold. If I wanted to filter my view, I could come in here and filter this and say, well, you know what? I only care about records that are contracts, right, that have contract in the title. So I filter my view and now I start to see a whole bunch of different contracts, again, different types of records, but I've got a single view of all of that the record classes those records are located in, and oh, here's a declared record. It has the lock on it. Here's a record that's on hold, right? And again, for any of these records, I can always click the ellipsis, and I can see all the record details. So here it tells me this one is on hold. This one was manually classified. The classification was overridden by the records manager. And here's the legal hold that it's currently placed on. Maybe I want to view my records by my file plan. Well, now I can come in and I can click record classes, and I can see the layout of my file plan. I can see my different record classifications. And if I now want to see, let's say, all of my records that are assigned to LEG01, my general contracts, I can simply click, and again, it brings up a window that shows me every record that is assigned to this specific record class, tells me where that record is coming from, and again, visually will tell me, here's the record class, oh, this record's on hold, this record's locked down, and again, I can view the record details from here. So the idea is to start to present to your records team really good visibility into what's being managed, right, regardless of where that record may be at rest. How's it being classified? How's the life cycle being applied? And what other policies are being applied to that record throughout its life cycle. Now, all of this gets set up and managed through your file plan. Again, through the same web interface, I can come in here to my file plan, and to begin the creation of this file plan, you can come in and create record categories and specific record classes by hand, right? If I want to do that, I click Create, a form pops up, and I can fill in all the information that's required. Or, for new installations, if you have your file plan, your retention schedule already documented in something like an Excel spreadsheet, we can actually import that to begin the classification process, or to begin the building of the file plan. Now, when I expand one of these, right, I can quickly see, here's my record category for my accounting and finance, here's my record category for administration, here's my record category for audit. Again, visually I can see that this can be expanded, and when I expand it, I now see the specific record classes for accounting and finance, for example. And a couple of things jump out. First, there's all these little icons out here. What do those mean? And the second, some of my folders are flat, some of my folders are not. Well, a flat folder simply means we're managing records administratively, individually, right? So each record is treated as an individual item. The open folders mean this is a record classification where we're taking the records and collecting them into case files. Based on things like any of those properties that I showed, we can collect records into case files, and now I can manage the entire case as a single entity, whether that case has 5 records in it or 50 records in it. The second thing is I can apply things like unique permissions on a record class or an entire category. So I'm the records manager, I can see everything, but maybe I want to give a user the ability to see only the accounting record classifications. Well, I can come in here for this record category, I can click permissions, and now I can assign Russ as a user who has the ability to view anything in accounting and finance, because it inherits down to all of the underlying record classes, and he can declare records. So he can mark records as being declared and lock them down. We also see there's a little check mark. That means I've also set up unique approvers for this record category. Again, as a records manager, I'll always see any records that need approval for marking as permanent, for disposition, or any other action, but I can come in and add additional approvers. So again, I've added Russ as an approver for accounting and finance. So now any records assigned to any of these record categories or record classifications, Russ will be able to view those, and he'll be able to approve the disposition of any of these records. Okay. I can come in and set up the properties around any of my record classifications. So every record class has properties that describe it, that have details that set up how the records are managed, whether the record classification contains vital records or not. And the record classification has rules that control how that classification process happens. So I have a specific physical record location that gets assigned to this record class. I have my file system. So on our file share, anything coming in from the file share, we're using the path on that file share to look for a folder called General Accounting and Banking. Any documents in that folder or below will automatically be assigned to records of ACC01. And in SharePoint, we're using those properties we talked about to say if it came in from SharePoint, either SharePoint on-prem or SharePoint online, either one, we're going to, first of all, look at the content type in SharePoint. And if it's a finance doc content type, then we're going to look at the metadata. And if the metadata column called doc type is set to general, we're going to automatically assign it to ACC01. So you can set up any number of classification rules. And your classification rules can be exact matches, or they can be things like likes and use wildcards, matches, use patterns. For dates, they can be greater than, equal than. There's a lot of flexibility in how you set up and manage the classification of records against your corporate file plan. And then I can come in and set up my life cycles. Well, I can predefine any number of life cycles. My life cycles, unlike a lot of systems, are not specifically tied to the record class. I can create my life cycles independently, and then when I create a new record class or I want to modify a record class, I just come in and pick the life cycle that I might want to then apply to that record classification. If I change the record class or the life cycle for an existing record class, what will happen is any records in this record classification will automatically inherit that new life cycle regardless of their location, and then in the background a timer job will run that will recalculate the expiration date of all the records based on the new life cycle. And these life cycles get created through the same web interface, right? So I can come in here, I can look, for example, here's a life cycle for my supplier contracts. I can see the number of phases. My life cycles can be any number of phases. And if we take a look at this life cycle real quick, my life cycle happens to have two phases. Phase one is really simple. We're looking at a metadata column. We have a trigger called contract paid. The trigger is what starts a life cycle phase. We're looking at a metadata column called contract paid. If that is checked so that the contract is marked as paid, we're not going to wait any period of time. We're going to declare the record and lock it down. And then we're going to go to phase two. And we're simply using an internal trigger that says from the date it was declared, we're going to wait 3 years, and then we're going to do a dispose and delete, right? So a fairly straightforward life cycle, but it takes multiple actions through the course of the life cycle just by the contract getting marked as paid. That might happen by a user clicking the metadata column box, might happen by a workflow updating it, could happen by an external system updating it, in SharePoint or whatever system it happens to be in. Now we talked as well about physical records being part of this. One of the great things is, in addition to my electronic records being classified and being assigned to my various file plan classes, I can also create physical records. I can manage the locations of where those physical records are stored and now have them fall under the exact same record classifications and lifecycle properties that my electronic records do. I don't have to have two different systems to manage electronic and physical. I can have a single view of everything, and I can manage a structure of where my physical records may be. Now, that structure could represent a physical location, like in this example, my warehouse. I have my warehouse again. You notice the UI is very visual in nature. When I expand my warehouse, I've got aisles in my warehouse. And in my aisles, I've got shelves. And on my shelves, I have boxes of records. So if we come in here and we take a look and we say, let me view the assets on that shelf. Well, now I can come in here and see that I've got property contracts and I've got employee files sitting on that shelf. Just like my electronic records, my physical records have properties that describe them: name, title, subject, what's the current location of the record, who's the owner of that record, are there barcode values assigned to that record, right? No different than an electronic record. There are properties that describe my record, and because of that, the record gets classified just like my electronic records, can be assigned to, in this example, a record classification for my personnel files. This happens to be a case-based record class, so now it also tells me the case that the record has been assigned to. And again, it shows me that record lifecycle visually. So just because this is a box sitting on a shelf, it's not treated any differently than my electronic records. I can view it, I can report against it, I can do whatever I need to. If I want to create a new physical record, I can do that as well. So I could come in here and say a new record, right? For the sake of the demo, put in some keywords. I can choose the type of asset that I'm creating. So we'll create a box. What's in the box? Maybe this one happens to be mixed media. I can assign an owner to the box. So who's going to be the owner of this box? We'll assign it to Rebecca Records. And now one thing unique about a physical records get charged out, right? I may want to request the box of physical records be sent to me. So as the creator of the record or as a records manager, I can indicate whether or not I will allow this box to be requested for charge outs. And then I can enter barcodes. So I can manually enter barcodes or use a barcode scanner to scan and enter that value, or I can have the system generate barcode values for me. So I can set up any number of barcode schemas. When I select the right schema, it simply generates the next available sequence in the pattern. Now I create my record, and I've got a new physical record that's been created in the system. It'll get classified, it'll inherit a life cycle, it'll be available for requests. And so if I want to request physical records, I can come in here and create a request bin. So we'll call this, whoops, can't type today. The webinar request, put in a request date. Is it urgent? Nope. Where are we going to have the record shipped to? Well, I want those shipped to the Los Angeles office. And we'll say, leave these with Bob. Now we create my request. And now I can come in here, you notice it tells me if records are available or not. I wanted to request our new record. I could come in here and simply say add to the request, put in the webinar request, say add and submit. And now you see the request has been submitted. It'll be put into a queue. It takes a few minutes for it to show up in the queue. And then an individual who is designated as the request processor or the physical records administrator sees all of the requests that are incoming. He can process those requests, so he can see what's been requested, where they want it sent to, any notes that were submitted as part of the request, when the request was submitted, and then he can choose to approve that request or reject it. So since he didn't give us a reason, we're going to reject that. So he is denied. Okay. Now, as we begin to collect and manage and get all of our records into one location, I talked about the visibility we have into that. We can also now manage the processes around that. So at some point, records reach the end of their life cycle. Well, because we are managing records across multiple locations, I can have a single records inbox as a records manager where I can view those records. Right, so now I can come in, I can come to my inbox and I can see every record that is awaiting approval of some action. That action could be, oh, it's waiting to be approved for disposal, it's waiting to be marked as permanent. If it's a physical record, it could be waiting for confirmation that it has been destroyed. Okay, that's one of the other unique things about a physical record. We can destroy the electronic record, but with a physical record, we need somebody to come back as a second step and say, yes, it really was destroyed. And I can visually see again, hey, this happens to be a case file that's up for disposition. These are individual records that are due for disposition. Right? It boldly tells me this is a case file. If I want to view the details of my case file, I can click on the ellipsis. And now it shows me, here are the records that make up my case file. There are 3 records in this case. If I want to view the details of one of the records, I can do that. It tells me, hey, here's when this record expired. Here's the retention that's been assigned to it. If I want to see more details about the record, I can come in and view that record details screen from here. Okay, so I've got full visibility again into kind of what's going on with each one of the records in the case. And if I want to approve and submit the entire case for disposition, I can simply click Approve and Submit, and my whole case will be submitted for disposition. The 3 records, even though they may be in different repositories, they're part of a single case. They'll all be disposed of as part of the case. For an individual record, I can do the same thing. I can come in here and say, let me click the ellipse. Here's my record. Here's the life cycle it's been assigned to. It's not vital. It's not obsolete. Here's when it expired. Here's the retention that was assigned to it. And now if I want to approve and submit that for disposition, I simply click Approve and Submit. I can put in a comment. I approve. We confirm that. The record is removed from my inbox. You notice my inbox is decremented from 22 to 21. And what happens, a request is now sent to the respective repository for that record to be actually destroyed. So if that record is sitting in SharePoint or SharePoint Online or on the file share, the appropriate connector will reach out, destroy that record, write an entry into my audit trail, and create a destruction certificate for me. So as records are destroyed, if the record class is configured appropriately, I get a destruction certificate that gets created. I can come in here, click the information and see, hey, here are the users that approved the destruction of that record. There were 7 records in the overall count of records that were destroyed. Here's the date that it happened, right? I see all of the information about what happened in the destruction of those records. And I have the ability to create and generate reports about what's going on with my, my records management system. Whoops, that's not good. Let's try that again.
It's got to be the internet.
Of course, it wouldn't be a live demo if we didn't have an issue, right? Let's see here. It's the nice thing about web-based applications. It's just a matter of reconnecting to the web server. There we go.
That just shows you how resilient our software is, right? Everyone just got a first case example.
You know it's live. And if I wanted to date myself, I would say something is live and not Memorex, but you got to be a certain age to know what that means. So anyway, here's the reporting screen. There's a number of reports that we provide out of the box with the system, and we provide a report designer so you can create your own custom reports, right, to report on any information that we have in the records database. So if I wanted to come in, for example, and say, you know what, I want to see a report on my file plan. Let me click that. It runs a report, brings up now, here's your file plan. Here's all the information about your file plan, right? I can see every record classification, all the information about it. And if I want to export that out, I can do it to any number of common formats. If I wanted to run a different report and let's say see what records are on hold for a specific legal case, I could do that. Come in here, choose my hold, click preview. And now it shows me, here are the records that are on hold. Here's when the hold was created. Here's where the record is, the record class that that record is in. Right, shows me everything that I need to know about that record. Right. So, you know, at the end of the day, again, I can see everything that I need to see about my records, whether it's a physical record or an electronic record. I can see where those records are located. I can reach into various sources and put policy on those records where they're at rest. So I'm not being required to migrate or move content all across my network to apply policy. And as a records manager, I've got an easy-to-use interface. I no longer need to be a SharePoint expert or a Documentum expert, or an expert in any ECM system to be able to apply my records policies. Been going for about a half an hour now. The last thing I'll show here is how this manifests itself in something like SharePoint. Now I'm in a SharePoint library, right? I'm going to go into my employee files here. And if I go into my employee files library, I'm in a site for my HR system, my HR team. I've got a library set up to represent my employee files, and I'm organizing my records by the employee number. Well, if I expand one of these out and we look at the various types of records, here we can see that we've got records for Dan and we've got records for Sue. Well, Dan's records are not locked, but you notice how some of Sue's records have this little lock sitting next to them? This happens to be a SharePoint 2016 environment. If I select Sue's record, you'll notice that there's a lock here. That's because Gimmal Records Management has declared this a record and now placed it in a retention based on the metadata state being set to record. That's how the lifecycle happened to be set up. And if we come into the ribbon, you notice all of the abilities to make changes to this record, whether it's delete the document, edit the properties, check it out, are now all disabled. In the background, when Gimmal Records Management says, declare this record and lock it down, our connector reaches into SharePoint and asks SharePoint to use its native locking to apply the lock. And when it comes time to disposition this record and destroy it, we'll delete it directly from SharePoint. If there's a need to unlock it at some point in time, we'll do that as well, right? So again, it becomes invisible to your end users. So as they're now working in SharePoint, they're uploading content, adding new content to SharePoint. They don't worry about records classification. The record classification just happens in the background. So at the beginning, Matt talked a little bit about our governance tools for SharePoint. If I want to bring a new document in, I can simply drag it and drop it using Gimmal's governance tools. Drop it on the library, come in here and fill in the information that might be requested of me as an end user. Well, I'm going to say this is an HR document. We'll say that's okay. What type of policy is this we happen to be uploading? Well, we'll just choose this to be a corporate policy. We'll say okay. And we could put a date in. And you could even have multiple profiles set up here. Well, our intelligent drag and drop lets me choose the content type, which will then dictate SharePoint content type and target location. And then I can apply some metadata in the background, prompt the user for other metadata, click OK. The document gets uploaded, gets placed into the right location. In the background, based on that information that the user entered, Gimmal Records Management will now crawl it, identify it, and classify it, and apply the appropriate lifecycle. That all happens invisibly to the end user. His job is simply to upload the content, get it into the right place, and with Gimmal's governance tools, we can assist him in doing that, whether it's with our drag and drop under the tiles on the top level of a site, whether it's drag and drop directly into a library in SharePoint, or whether it's using standard SharePoint upload mechanisms like the upload button, or syncing from OneDrive, or using tools like Gimmal's email integration to drag and drop emails out of Outlook. However the content's coming in, our intelligent drag and drop and our rules-based application of metadata can automatically drive how metadata gets applied, and then as the content comes in, we can find that content, we can identify it, and we can automatically apply policy to it. And this hasn't been picked up in the background yet by the crawler, but it will be. But you can see, once it is crawled, I'll be able to see that same information from the Manage Record screen that I could see from right here in Gimmal Records Management. Okay. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Matt. Let me get the slide deck back up here.
Perfect. Thank you, Dean, for that in-depth demonstration. Now, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them because we will now jump into the Q&A portion. You will also see a survey pop up on your screen. If everyone can go ahead and take a quick second and answer those questions. After the Q&A, we can go through those results. Again, they are anonymous, but we can see the percentages. And as a group, I think we can go through, look at that, and it'll be very informative. So I do have some questions here for you, Dean.
Okay.
And the first question is, what browsers are supported?
Any modern browser, the current version of any modern browser should be supported. So, personally, I've used it with Firefox, Chrome, Edge, IE. I know other folks in the company have used it with Safari. So the interface is all HTML5. So, you can use pretty much the current version of any browser will support it.
Okay. And I know you touched on the reporting functionality of Gimmal Records Management, but we do have a question here that says, can custom reports be created?
They can. So as I mentioned, all of that information about your records is stored in the Gimmal Records database. It's a SQL database. We provide a report designer with the product. It's called, it's Telerik, so it's a commercial report writer. And you can use Telerik to design any custom reports against any of the information that's in our database. Because we know we're not going to create every report anybody may ever want, right? There'll always be custom needs.
Right. The next question we have is, do we log changes to life cycles or record classes?
We do. So when you make, I showed the audit trail for an individual record. There's also a system audit trail. So when I make changes to things like my file plan, or I change the life cycle assigned to a record classification or create new life cycles, any of those system type actions are also captured in the audit trail and can be reported against.
Okay. Next question we have here, how does the Documentum Connector lock or secure documents that are declared records, and can that be controlled?
The Documentum Connector, one of the nice things about the Documentum Connector is, just like with Sharepoint or the file shares, we will reach in and we will request Documentum to lock the record using its native locking. Now, the great thing about that is it does not require the Documentum Records Manager add-on to do that, which is a supplemental piece of software you have to buy from them to do records management and Documentum. So we'll use the native locking that Documentum provides, the same as it does when it does checkouts and things like that, and we will control that. So the document gets locked in Documentum and becomes immutable.
Perfect. The next question is, do you integrate with Imanage or any other common legal document management systems? Now, I know we don't have a productized one for Imanage, but custom connectors can be built. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Dean?
Yeah, we do have the, our SDK is published. It's out on GitHub. And so we do have the ability to create custom connectors. Imanage comes up occasionally with legal. That's certainly one of their target industries. eDocs is another one that comes up occasionally, in legal. We don't have commercial connectors to those today. How we create connectors is kind of based on market demand. But for individual clients that may need one, or for kind of niche systems, we can create custom connectors to any system.
Perfect. Next question is, can I configure some record workflows like change metadata, change security level, change classification, and other workflows that can be requested by end business users to different approval steps? It's a little bit of a longer question.
Yeah, and it's, it's a bit of a business process question. So if I want to do things like change metadata on the record, if it's not a physical record, well, then that record is stored in a repository like Documentum or FileNet or SharePoint. So the workflow you may want to actually trigger the workflow out of that system to someone who has the permissions to change the metadata in the target repository, because Gimmal Records Management will then pick that up when we do a crawl, right? Our incremental crawls always look for either new records or records that have been modified in some way, and a metadata property change would be one of those. If you wanted to trigger workflows from inside Gimmal Records Management, that can be done as part of a lifecycle action. So we can trigger SharePoint workflows, for example, from a records lifecycle. And that could obviously do anything you want. If you had other workflow systems you would want to trigger, we could certainly create the connection to those using the SDK. So it's a little bit of where do you want the change of the property or the security. Again, security around the record itself, and access to that record gets managed by the repository. Access to manipulating it as a record is managed through Gimbal Records Management. So it's a bit of a question of what is it you want to do from a business standpoint.
Right. That makes sense. The next question we have here is a little bit back towards our connector discussion, which is, does this application have a connector for a financial sector system of record, such as, I believe it's FiServ or FiServ? Director, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I think that's a very similar answer to the one we previously gave.
It is a similar answer. That's not one we have a commercial connector for. We could certainly look at the requirements and make a determination of what do you need it to do, and how we would go about that. Typically, as long as the target system provides an API, and that API gives us the ability to both crawl and extract properties, to be able to lock documents where they're immutable, and gives us the ability to delete things with an elevated privilege, because we want to be able to delete them while they're locked, then we can create connectors.
Right. Next question is, can you approximate the time it would take to stand up records management at a mid-sized federal agency? Now, off the top of my head, to get really an accurate time frame, I think we would just need to get a little bit more information about your specific business and your specific implementation case. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Dean?
Yeah, the software installation can be rapid. If you use Gimbal Records Management as a SaaS offering, the Gimbal Records Management web app is already stood up. We just create a tenant specific for you, with your logins, and then we'd import your file plan, which may take a little work depending on how robust it is, how many record classes you may have, things like that. And then it would be a question of configuring the connectors, and the connectors would be the touch point into your organization, whether it's SharePoint, SharePoint Online, file shares, whatever it may be. If you wanted to install it on-prem, the installation is actually relatively quick. And I say that with caveats because there can be things that come up with security, network security. Maybe it's a hardened environment. Well, that adds wrinkles and things like that. But in general, the initial installation and kind of first pass on the configuration can be relatively quick. But to give you something more concrete, as Matt said, we'd have to have a little more information.
And getting that information could be something like a very, very quick phone call. So if after this call, if you would like to reach out to us, we can definitely just set up a quick discussion and get that accurate or best guess time frame for you. The next question is, how long does it take to set up the classification and metadata? I think this is a little bit similar to the answer we just gave.
Yeah, so setting up the metadata is that depends on kind of the environment you have today. So we go into a lot of clients that are using SharePoint or SharePoint Online, for example. Some clients are very organized. They use the content type hub. They have content types and custom metadata columns defined. And we can begin using that information right away, because when we crawl the documents, we're extracting all of that into the database. That can be used to set up your classification rules. Other clients, not quite as organized. They have the classic SharePoint sprawl, where SharePoint just kind of grew up and there were no centralized content types, and you need to do a little more analysis up front to kind of figure out, is there some commonality you could classify against or trigger life cycles against and things like that. Or you make more use of the wildcards like I talked about. So it's a little bit of it depends, but usually with our quick starts, our approach is to come in, get your file plan imported, set up a couple, set up 2, 3, 4 record classes with classification rules, life cycles, and more importantly, teach you how to do it as we go through that process, so that once we have a few record classes defined, a few life cycles set up, you're in a position to now continue on and build out the rest. You're not captive to Gimbal. to do that for you unless you want us to.
All right. The next question is, can declared records in Documentum be configured to allow versioning to supersede records?
That's a good question. I can say that, I say nice things about Documentum is the way it handles versions is each version of a document is treated as an individual separate document in its own right, has its own metadata properties, can have its own security. Version 1, version 2, and version 3 are treated as 3 separate documents. I can lock those individually. I don't have to lock the whole version tree. I could trigger retention based on a document a record being marked as superseded. I'm trying to think. We may have to have a little more one-on-one discussion for the specific use case you brought up, so I could understand it. In general, I would think the answer is yes, because I know we do recognize each version is unique, a unique record in its own right.
Okay. The next question is, again, a Documentum question. It's a little bit longer, and it states that we have a Documentum lifecycle where a version of a document becomes a record when it enters the effective state. However, new versions can be created from it. If the document is locked in Documentum, it can no longer be versioned. Is there any way to change the connector behavior to simply mark it as a record rather than lock the document?
I'm glad you threw that question out there, because just because Gimbal Records Management classifies something and assigns a lifecycle to it, and maybe the retention is even begun, does not mean we have to lock it. Okay, so this is a perfect use case of that. I have version 2, version 1 and version 2 of, let's say, a policy. That policy has been classified, falls under retention. Retention is begun. I want to create version 3. Well, as long as I don't declare the record and lock it down, there's no problem with doing that. And version 3 kind of in Documentum becomes a new document in its own right. So the fact that I classify something and have it under a retention lifecycle does not mean I have to declare it and lock it down in Gimbal Records Management. You have flexibility around that.
Okay. The next one I have is, does it use auto-categorization? Can you train it to recognize certain types of items, example, contracts, etc., for records with event-based disposition, or is that all handled via associating product with its existing workflows?
So we do support event-based disposition, right? So I can have life cycles that are triggered by the creation of a specific event instance. Classic examples are retirement of an asset. We had a client that leased aircraft, right? They wanted to trigger retention on a specific aircraft's records. When that aircraft retired, an event would be created against that aircraft and its tail number. Now that would trigger the retention on all the records. Same thing is true with employee files. Matt walks in on Monday, says, won the lottery, I'm out of here, gonna go travel Europe for a year. We now need to create an employee termination for Matt.
Don't put that on live on the air. I've got a couple of numbers and I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
So, event-based retention is absolutely supported. How that event, how that retention is triggered can be against a case. So with employee files, for example, I could create an event instance against a specific case for Matt, or I could use metadata properties. There's any number of ways to kind of trigger that.
Okay. Now, I believe we got time for one more question, and that is, how does it classify records and file shares that do not have metadata outside of standard metadata, date, created by, etc.? For example, things that aren't in clearly defined folder and don't have names that clue to what they are.
Yeah, it's, the software's not magic. It's the limits of kind of what you have. But the good thing is I can use things like wildcards. So if I have a file share that's fairly, let's say fairly uncontrolled and things are just kind of everywhere and there's not a ton of structure, I could still create a classification rule that said something as simple as if anywhere in the URI, the path to that record, the term contract appears, or a certain vendor name appears, or or the word benefit appears. I could use wildcards to drive classification at a high level, and I could at least now get things initially classified and then begin to move things around and organize them prior to getting things more granular. So that's one way to do it. Another is to use, prior to applying the classification to the file share, if you know, quite frankly, it's just a total mess and things are all over the place with no structure, use a content analytics tool to do a first level of organization, then apply record classification to the file share, see if you get what you expect, and then make adjustments to either your classification rules or where things are stored. So a couple of different ways. We've worked with a number of clients that have that exact problem to put a plan in place on how to best approach it, depending on what they want to do.
Perfect. Now, while we have a couple minutes left, I would like to go through the poll results because I promised everyone that I would share those with you. So the first one is, what pains are you currently experiencing with your records management process? 94% answered physical and electronic records are managed separately, followed closely by second and third, which is the inability to apply policies across multiple systems, and then the inability to ensure content is deleted when it should be. I mean, those three main things are answered by the federated software that we provide. And I think the physical and electronic records, that is a number that we see continuously increase, as well as the inability to apply policies across multiple systems as most organizations continue to adopt those cloud content management systems. Dean, do you want to touch on that at all?
No, I think you nailed it spot on. Having that consolidated view of all your records is huge, and that's typically what people have not had in the past. Electronic records are in one system, physical records are in an Access database or a spreadsheet or a system that only manages physical records. You don't have that view.
Right. Which content repositories are you currently using? First place is Sharepoint with 88%, second place is FileShares with 82%, and third place is OneDrive with 65%. I think that's actually the highest percentage we've ever seen of OneDrive users on our webinar, so that's actually pretty insightful for us. Apparently that's starting to catch on. Number 3 is, how often does your organization rely primarily on end users to supply metadata to digital content? We have a 3-way tie, which has never ever happened. So 29% across the board, always, usually, and sometimes. So in some way, shape, or form, 30% of the organizations are out there asking their end users to classify and tag content, which Dean really went into the details of how problematic that can be. This is a heavy hitter here. Is your organization planning to improve records management processes over the next 18 months? 100% said yes. We've been doing these webinars for a long time, and we've seen this number continuously increase over the past couple of years, but we have never hit 100%. I wish I had a celebratory bell or something. This is fantastic. It's great to see that everyone is moving towards improving records management processes. I'm kind of flabbergasted here. We're at 100%. And then, how many people are responsible for records management and compliance in your organization? Less than 5 is 60% of you, and then 5 or more is 47% of you. So that's a number that we're continuously seeing. Less than 5 is going lower, 5 or more is going higher. I guess that kind of matches the 100% right above. That, Dean, based on your experience, a lot of the clients we're talking to, or a lot of the new clients and conversations we're having, most of them are really starting to adopt dedicated compliance and records management departments.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Things like GDPR, some of the high-profile security breaches that have happened. I mean, compliance, records management, getting visibility into what they have. That's become paramount for a lot of organizations today. There's just too much risk now not to. Right.
All right, we have 1 minute left, so if we have no more questions, actually we did have a couple more questions. I apologize if we didn't have time to get to your questions. Please send us an email. Please email Dean or I directly, and we will answer those questions accordingly. We don't want to forget about you guys. We're just running out of time here. But if you would also like to receive a personalized demo of our software, feel free to email Dean or I, or you can contact us directly on our website or send an email directly to info@gimmal.com. We'd love to hop on a call with you. It only takes a couple of minutes and we can definitely have that personalized conversation. And if you're unsure where you are in your information management strategy or unsure if you're even ready for this technology, we are providing a free health check webinar on the 20th of this month, in which we will help you assess your current information management situation and gauge where you are today. So you can register for that webinar by visiting our website as well. So once again, we will send that recording this webinar recording to everyone within 24 to 48 hours, and we hope you join us again for our next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dean, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.